want to know a big secret about being organized? Are you sure? It is all about flow. Now, let me explain. The word flow implies continuous movement, such as the river flows into the ocean. However, as humans, we have gotten really good at stuff, which is my generic term I'm going to use here, at stuff flowing into our space, and we just aren't quite as accomplished usually at stuff flowing out of our space. Now, heads up, okay, this idea of flow is always important, and it's definitely easier to start using flow prior to having any kind of a life transition. And we'll get more of that in a minute. But overall, I can assure you that it is time to find your flow. Now, as I said, I'm using that word stuff generically. So when you hear me say that, just know that it could be papers or books or shoes or even tasks or apps or projects or gadgets or whatever. And I'm going to be using a bunch of different illustrations. So hopefully over the course of this, you'll find one that sort of speaks to you. So let's start with a dresser drawer full of t-shirts. And then you happen to see a sale, whether in person or online, and you buy four more. And so the question is, do you jam them into your already full drawer? Or do you leave some on a chair or maybe on a floor? Or do you delete four of your current t-shirts to make way for the new ones? I don't know, just a question. And there could be a difference between what you do and whether or not it works for you. And if it doesn't work for you, what you know might work better. Okay, no judgment here. Okay, let's talk about a bookshelf. In this case, this is a little bit more of a professional example, but again, you can put your own what into this example. So let's talk about a bookshelf that is packed with outdated training and conference materials. And you know that most of the new stuff is in a digital format. And so while occasionally you may get a new book for some kind of training material, overall, it's mostly electronic. So do you put this new book on the floor? Because again, bookshelf already packed. Do you move some of the training documents that are on the bookcase onto the floor and then put the book into the bookcase? I don't know. Do you decide to delete the obsolete information that's currently in the bookcase and then be able to not only put the new book in there, but also to have room for others that may come in the future? Now, in each example, you probably noticed you had a couple of choices. You could keep adding stuff to whatever the container was and experience overwhelm, or you could delete a similar number of items as you add. And when I say delete, I mean that could be recycling, consigning, donating. That's just the word delete I use for generally it is leaving the space permanently. Now, of course, there is actually a third option that I don't like to mention very often. And this third option is that you'll decide to take action later. Unfortunately, this later time often becomes never. So let me add a few other concepts when we're talking about this word flow. And I've actually put them all together in something that I call my flexible structure method, but I'm not going to really go into that in depth right this moment. Instead, I want to use a couple of other examples um, and see if that will help a little bit more. In this case, these examples, though, I'm going to put a little bit more terminology in terms of the why and how in there. All right, so I'm going to talk right now about an excess of personal or professional papers as my little illustration. Again, you can make it be something else. It could be books, it could be whatever. So what I'm going to, sorry about that. um, So let's say with the papers, which I know again, we have a lot of digital stuff, so you could even put digital documents as what you want to supplement or substitute. All right. So with papers though, you choose a file cabinet for your papers. Now that you can decide, is it lateral, is it vertical, is it 4 drawer, 5 drawer, 3 drawer, 2 drawer. You get to decide that, but it's your container, and you've decided that in this one cabinet, all of your papers must fit in there, which means you've made that your boundary. Now, over time, you have probably noticed that it's getting harder to put new papers into the drawers. Now, despite your best attempt to use electronic documents as much as possible, you know that you're always going to have some paper. So now you have a choice. If your drawers are getting full and you know you're going to have more coming in, or maybe even, you've already got more than needs to go in, you can decide to maintain your current boundary of the one file cabinet, or you could implement flow to delete some of those papers. And again, well, in this case, that would be recycle or shred, or possibly make some of those electronic, depending on the type of paper that it is. And you can, as I said, sorry, you can maintain your current boundary and implement flow, or you can create a new boundary, which in this case probably means getting a second file cabinet of some sort. So, of course, the third alternative to that is just to let the extra papers spill all over to other horizontal surfaces and or onto the floor. Now, if this scenario is feeling a little bit overwhelming to you, and or if you can see it in your mind and it's creating stress, that is not my intention. So it might be a good time to take a couple of deep breaths, maybe to practice a little bit of mindfulness, which is one of my beacon habits, and it really helps to get you centered before you make your decision. Now, why am I bringing this up when I'm usually talking about organizing your productivity as it relates to some kind of a life disrupting situation? Because it's actually easier to establish flow when you're not having some kind of life transition. And plus, since I'm recording this during COVID times, we are all going through a big upheaval to our lifestyle. So now's as good as any to discuss flow. Now, given all of that information, now it's going to be your turn. And I don't mean right this very, very moment, but I would suggest, urge you to run a little experiment for yourself. All right. And I'm going to tell you the steps of the experiment, however, along with one example. Again, you get to choose your own example. So, the first thing you do in this experiment is you choose where you feel, the location you feel most inundated by your stuff. Now, in this case, for my illustration, I'm going to say in the kitchen. All right. Then you get to decide what is most overwhelming about that room or that part of a room. And just do a small part of it. Don't say the whole living room or the whole bonus room or whatever. Try to narrow that down a little bit, because you want to make it so that you can actually do this and not feel overwhelmed just thinking about it. All right, so in the case of my illustration in the kitchen, we're going to say that the problem is the inability to find the canned goods or the dry goods when you need them. Now, the third part to the experiment is to decide your method of flow. Now, there are several different ways to do this. Number one, you can use up whatever it is before you buy more. In the case of the kitchen, you might decide that for 1 or 2 meals each week, you're going to use whatever you can from the pantry, and that all you're going to buy in the store is fresh food. That's one way of doing it. Another way of creating flow is to have the one in, one out expectation. So for every new item you bring in, you delete an item. And again, deleting, donating, in this case, possibly using it up, shredding, consigning, etc., recycling. You get to decide how it's going to be deleted, but that way you at least only maintain the amount of stuff you currently have if you're doing the one in, one out. All right. The third thing you can do is you can just decide, hey, I'm going to declutter in small sections. So again, we'll take my kitchen example. So it might be that you say, you know what, tomorrow afternoon, I've got a little bit of time. I'm going to take 15 minutes and I'm going to go through one shelf, pull out, again, kitchen example, pull out things that either I'm definitely not going to use, things that have expired, etc. But depending on your illustration, it may be part of a shelf, part of a drawer, part of just a space. You get to decide that. And of course, you can decide to use any combination of these methods, or you can create a method completely of your own. All right. Hopefully, I have given you some ideas about finding your flow to keep your space organized or to even make it organized in the first go round. And if you're willing to try the experiment that I talk about at the end, I would love for you to let me know in the comments that you're going to work on this experiment and what space, where do you feel most inundated by your stuff? Just because I would love to be a cheerleader here and help to cheer you along as you try this experiment with me. Janice Russell, I hope you'll join me in the future.